Hello again and welcome to The Luxury of Choice, a B2B technical sales and business podcast brought to you by the training team of George James Limited. My name is Steve Vaughan, I'm a senior sales trainer at George James and I'm also the host and producer of this podcast. Once again, I'm joined by my good colleagues, Jonathan Cooper, good friends I was going to say, and colleagues, Jonathan Cooper and Pru Layton. Good colleagues as well, of course. Guys, how are we doing?
Yeah, thanks. I remember the last podcast, there was a terrible pregnant pause, so I thought I'd go get in early this time. Yeah, very good week, although two 4:30 starts always make it interesting. It's good for the soul. Wow. One was intentional, the other was unintentional, but there we go. A good week. Thank you, Steve.
That's what happens. Good. How are you, Pru?
Oh, yeah, kind of glad it's Friday. But also, I had a really good week, actually, if a little tiring. I just spent 2.5 days with the sales team in a country house, learning all about exciting stuffs like buyer personas. And
cool.
Then each team took turns to cook on a different night. And as you can imagine, there were salespeople. It was seriously competitive. And,
no, I'm sure.
But, my team won. What can I say?
What a surprise. So, actually, I could have actually come upstairs and asked you how you are, because we should point out you're sitting right directly above me in the weird world of the podcast world. So, Pru, you were doing some training locally, so we thought it'd be a good idea for you to stop here and record this. But so we can get separate video and audio. We're both in different rooms. Weird. It's not that we don't like each other. It's just how the technology works. Okay, guys. So we're working our way through the sales process, and we've explored a number of topics around the sales process. And I think buyer personas, by the way, that's a great idea for another podcast at another time. But what we thought we would look at today is negotiation. Now, it's such a big topic. Actually, we're going to do this as a two-parter. So we're going to look at everything that happens before a negotiation today. What is a negotiation? What gets involved? What do we have to think about? And then next time, so in a month's time, we'll be looking at actually the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of what happens when we're across the table from a customer. So going to be an interesting conversation. Negotiation is one of my favourite parts of the sales process. And I know for you too, it's definitely one of your favourite parts of the sales process. So shall we start right at the get-go? What is a negotiation? So, Pru, what are your thoughts on that?
A negotiation is a thing that happens right at the end of the sales process. And it's about that final discussion between both parties about what does the final outcome look like, not just in terms of price, but in terms of a lot of other areas. So finally, what are you gonna buy from us? What's going to be included, etc., etc.
Right. So it's not just about getting a good price then, Jonathan?
No, certainly not. I think there's, as Pru's alluded to, there are many factors involved. So for me, yes, it is a process that we go through. Yes, it's often identified in many companies as a stage in their sales process, or it's referenced as we come towards the close as part of a final stage. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's a process that two parties go through. Almost certainly not exactly in the same position at the outset, to find an agreement, as Pru said. I think it was inevitable that one of us was going to mention win-win, so it's just to find that agreement.
Let's get that out there straight away. Win-win. Okay.
Yes, that final agreement where that we're both happy with, and that we can walk away from that negotiation. Both parties feeling, or occasionally there's more than two parties, of course, but most of the time it's two parties in our world. Walk away happy.
Absolutely. So something you said, Pru, I want to come back to, and it's an important point of thing. You said right at the end of the sales process. Does that mean we're not negotiating earlier on? We're not negotiating with, people that we're doing demonstrations with or whatever?
Dangerous, isn't it? You're stepping into dangerous territory here, Steve.
Tell me why.
We'll find out how dangerous.
I think a lot of what we do when we are managing a sales opportunity, there are elements of that sort of give and take that takes part in a negotiation. So I think some of the things we do, some of the skills we use are really, really helpful. But when I think of a negotiation, it's that final agreement, that final step just before the business is concluded. And we should always do it at the right part of the sales process, and actually with the right person who has the authority to negotiate, who has the authority to agree what the final deal agreement looks like, which will include price, but not just price.
Right, interesting. So thinking about our listener base, people who listen to the show, and what we train around, people selling scientific equipment, laboratory equipment, life science equipment, consumables for that matter. In that case, would that then, Jonathan, predicate from what Pru said, would that always be the purchaser, that person?
No, not always. I mean, I think it does depend precisely what market you are selling into, which customer type of customers you are selling to. So no, not always. I haven't always negotiated with the purchaser in many occasions, but sometimes I've negotiated with somebody in maybe in a technical services type role. I've ended up negotiating with laboratory managers who've been authorised to negotiate. I think the critical word that Pru used was this word authorised. And in terms of this dangerous ground and where we negotiate, when I've looked at the outcomes of the negotiations that I felt were the best ones for me and the customer, it was normally because it normally related very, very, very closely to the effectiveness of my qualification. So although I strongly agree with Pru, this is something that absolutely we do towards the very end of the sales process. I do think as well that preparation for the negotiation almost starts at the very first engagement we have with the customer. And that's one of the key questions. I think is a critical one, which we don't often ask enough. Who will I be negotiating with at the end of this? Who is authorised to? But I think you could also say who thinks they're authorised to negotiate, not just who is authorised to negotiate. And I'm sure we'll get on to...
That's a different question, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. To answer your question, not always with the purchaser.
Okay, that's interesting. And you said an important thing about qualification. So we obviously did an episode on qualification a little while ago, and how it's important to understand who we're talking to, are they the right people, and so on and so forth. So I guess if we don't qualify, for instance, the right people, we can end up negotiating with the wrong people. So what would be the downside then? So if we do end up negotiating with the wrong person, what could be the implication of that to the business, to our sale Pru?
Well, let's draw on some personal experience, Steve. I know where
it's always a good idea.
Well, I know where you're going with this one. So, in my early days, I used to sell a lot into the academic space. And you go into selling the academic space, and I was probably less good than I should have been. No, I was less good than I should have been, really, about finding out who's got the kind of authority to agree the final deal. I was so busy technically, winning the business technically, did a grand job winning the business technically occasionally. And a lot of the PIs or the lab managers or the department heads like to do a bit of negotiation. So I would end up, saying, yeah, we love yours, and we can have a quote, what's on this, and I would agree the final deal, shake hands, forecast it, this is a dead cert, we're fine here, this one's coming in.
Woohoo!
And then I'd get that horrible phone call or email. Somebody from procurement, Pru, I've got an interesting piece of paper in front of me. I think we should set up a meeting. And my heart would sink. Why? What? The deal's been agreed. I've already told everybody what I'm getting. I gave them the best deal I ever had. Unfortunately, procurement took a different view of what the best deal would look like, and it didn't necessarily align with mine.
So this is what we call in our training the salami effect, isn't it? So, Jonathan, would you like to say a bit more about what the salami effect is?
Yeah, and hands I can hold up both my hands.
Pizza.
There we are. They even show in front of the camera. Certainly guilty of this.
Oh, me too. We've all done it.
I think so.
Yeah, we've all done it.
That's right. Yeah, show me a salesperson that hasn't. As long as you learn from it, it's fine. But yeah, so the salami effect, something I learned a long time ago. So if you imagine your salami, and very, very easy to lose multiple slices of your salami. So and I think as salespeople, we get closer to doing the deal, we get excited. Why not, right? It's that it's the kill, isn't it? It's that final thing where we push this over the line, and we get excited. We start to get buying signals from the customer. The customer may indicate, maybe very direct, and tell us, we're in the driving seat. This is yours. So very easy to make concessions to the scientists, the manager of the scientists, and even then somebody perhaps in some sort of senior technical role, all asking for things, and why not? And very, very easy to end up, giving something to the scientist, something to the manager, something to somebody else, and maybe you go around that loop a couple of times. I must admit, I've probably done it if I thought long and hard enough.
Yeah, me too.
And then, of course, as Pru said, then arrives, the person who is authorised to negotiate and actually whose job it is, and may well be bonus targeted, on some sort of saving or the type of deal that they actually do. So, we sit down for that final negotiation, and we've already lost 4 or 5 slices of our salami. And that, of course, doesn't just impact price. It obviously then reflects on the margin as well. So that's, as I've always understood it, the salami effect. Yeah, watch out for that one.
Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah, guilty as charged. Yeah, I mean, with a very small, with a pepperoni.
Yeah, that's right. I think one just final comment I would make there is I know that I've been the victim a couple of times of this being played as a tactic. So actually, procurement have briefed their own scientists about the way to play this. And I've arrived already wrapped up like just ready to be served. So beware. Is it a tactic, right? Is it a tactic that point. Procurement have actually been very clever enough to play? So, watch out.
Love it. And I think also an important point there that we mentioned earlier was at the right stage of the sales process. So what often happens in our business, particularly with capital equipment, is that we have to do some kind of budget quote. So like the university or the customer, whatever they are, can apply for funding. So here's a quotation, so you can apply for funding, and hopefully they get the grant or whatever. And I've never understood why people give discounts on those, but they do, don't they? So why would you put a discount on something where somebody's applying for funding? If anything, you want them to, you want to put the price up, because they don't always get all they ask for, do they? So why would you give a discount on a budget proposal? But people do, and I've probably done it myself as well.
I was just going to confess and say, I'm really sorry, Steve, I've done that.
Okay, well, I'm not your manager anymore.
I was so excited to get kind of involved in the early stage when they were writing a grant proposal. It was probably one of the first few that I started to get involved in. And I had this foolish idea, clearly, that if I gave them a really good price in terms of what they applied for, it would put me in the front seat when and if they got the grant. And I really did not think it through. So, of course, my salami effect got even worse because I was always starting from a pretty low base in the first place. So it doesn't matter how thin a slice I lost, it looked less and less attractive. And just to add,
like a cocktail sausage.
Just to add really to what you said, Jonathan, I think there is a problem in terms of your credibility with a purchaser, with the margin that you get. But there's also this huge impact on you making your own personal target.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I give, just to be purely selfish, like lots of good salespeople are, I've got a revenue target to hit. And the problem is that if I set myself up to be a victim of this, then I just have to sell more rather than being good at this and selling fewer at a higher price. It took me a few years to work that out, I have to say.
That's a really good point, actually.
I think in the early stage of my career, I can remember somebody who I attached myself to. They became my mentor, not through choice, but because I decided they would be. And they use a great phrase with me. Remember, Jonathan, the more you give away, the more you have to sell. Dead simple. Yeah. And that's just so true. Yeah, and and whether you're selling relatively few high cost units, or whether you're selling, you're doing a lot of deals, through consumables, through reagents, through services, it applies, right? It has the same impact, and and of course the additional impact of, if that price, if you do happen to give something away, if you don't negotiate well enough, then that could set the price for a considerable length of time, that becomes your base, and great purchasers will use that. That's the base for next time. That's where we finished last time. That's where I begin this time. And I would do the same in their shoes.
Good point. And as I say, we'll talk more about the mechanics and the actual doing the negotiation next time. But all we've talked about so far is price. So is negotiation just about price?
No.
What do we think on that one? Go on, Pru.
I mean, if you make it just about price, as anybody who's worked with us will know, you've already lost. You know, if you think negotiation is about price, it's only going one way, and it's not the way you'd like it to go. So, you know, we could kind of make it all about price, but we are always going to walk away with less than we could have done if that's the only thing we're willing to discuss, negotiate and agree on. But there's a whole range of other things, I think, that we can consider about why the organisation would want to do business with us. Human nature says, be suspicious of the cheapest thing you see. And people don't change when they go back into their work life as opposed to their personal life. You know, we don't like things that are surprisingly cheap or surprisingly low cost. And I honestly don't know a scientist who would want to do all of their work with the cheapest anything, the lowest price anything. They value the quality of what they do, their data and all the other things far too highly to go, I'm going to use the cheapest of everything to attain what I'm doing.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't compute really. Getting the best for the cheapest doesn't feel like it makes sense, does it really? You know, common sense says that really, Jonathan.
Yeah, that was a great quote by John Ruskin. I mean, and it must be over 100 years old, which effectively said, buy cheap, buy twice. You know, really, really good.
And if you
really
can do
good
that, you
quote.
might as well buy something better.
Absolutely. And, you know, and that's where for me, and I go back to qualification, that's where for me, having a mindset of, yes, I negotiate formally right at the end of the sales process, but in terms of the preparation I do, that should start for me with the very first engagement you have with the customer. You know, one of those things is trying to understand for me the strength of your position. So understanding what is really important to the customer has got for me a significant part to play in ultimately any negotiation. Knowing the strength of your position when you go and have those final discussions, whether it's face to face or, you know, over video or even a telephone call. Occasionally it's even done by email. But knowing the strength of your position is everything.
Not.
And only, correct. And only by great qualification will you really understand that. And that's crucial to when you walk into that negotiation to know. That's really important.
I think that's a great point. And sometimes some of the companies we work with, they say to us, we really want to do some negotiation training. We've got a problem with negotiating. But actually the problem is qualification.
Yeah.
It's not negotiating.
Yes, correct.
It's being good at qualifying, isn't
correct.
it? Really? So
it is.
Let's now assume then that we've identified the right person. It's the right stage in the sales process. And we've got a negotiation coming up. So again, we'll talk about what happens on the day next time. But before we even rock up to negotiate, or whether we're going to do it on Teams, but hopefully not by email, but at least let's assume we're going to do it face-to-face. What are the kind of things that we need to think about, Pru, before we go any further?
Well, I think we need to think about, to sort of echo what Jonathan just said, the strength of our position. The strength of our position both technically and the strength of our position in terms of economically or from a business point of view. And perhaps, you know, if we haven't qualified the economic decision maker in the same way as we qualify the technical decision maker, we might want to think about, what do they care about? You mentioned it earlier, Jonathan, that often professional procurers have their own targets to meet, their own expectations, the things that they think are important, which probably have almost nothing to do with the specification and performance of what they're buying. They often don't actually know or understand, but they'll have a whole other set of criteria which are really important for them to choose which organisation they do business with or which company, which are just as important. So I think, you know, move your technical head away and start to think like a business person. You know, what is it that this person in front of me might be interested in terms of demonstrating that we're a good business to work with for them?
What are your thoughts on that, Jonathan?
You know, no surprise. You know, completely agree with Pru on that. One of the things that, I like to start thinking about, as I go through the rest of the sales process is when we do get to that point where we negotiate, do I have a clear view in my own mind? And I'm going to be selfish to start with my position. Do I have real clarity in terms of what it's critical that I get from this negotiation? Do I know effectively where my walkaway position is? Do I know what my nice to have position would look like? And do I know what my bonus position would look like? So have I got a real clear understanding of my own position? But I think the real art of one of the things about great qualification, and I think it's an art form in a way, is to really try and get an understanding of the customer's position too. What is it that they've got to definitely get from this negotiation? What is essential for them? What is critical? But equally, what is a nice to have? What is a bonus to them? Because that has a profound impact on what happens when we start trading. And of course, we should only be doing that during the negotiation. And I'm sure that's something we'll talk about in depth during part 2. But leading up to that,
will for sure.
Yeah. Often it's referred to, as the zone of possible agreement. It's the ZOPA, I think, is a phrase that was used a long time ago with me on a course I went on. But really understanding what that window looks like for an agreement, because at the outset you may be actually quite a long way apart, and working out, how you can get there with the customer is fundamental to success at the end of the day. So on the basis that they may well be doing something similar, and professional buying organizations will be, we should be doing the same. We should be thinking about what that end agreement looks like and thinking about it at least from qualification onwards.
Okay. So before we even sit down to negotiate, thinking about what our best case scenario, what our worst case scenario is, what our acceptable.
Yep. Yes.
So, and try and anticipate, Pru, what because we won't know, and they're probably not going to tell us. But before we even turn up, can we do that? Can we try and anticipate what might be their best case, their worst case, and their walkaway position? Can we do that, do you think?
I think we can. I think the more people we speak to as well, the more points of view we get to start to build that picture. It's very risky if you rely on a single person's point of view, and the point at which you go into the negotiation, you've only heard one view. And we know that when we work with scientists and technical people, they will always think that their purchase is the most important, the super critical one, that it's the only thing that's going to be important to the organisation. Not always true. I think the other thing is thinking about not just in terms of price, but other reasons why they may value us as an organisation. When I talk to most procurement professionals, of course they want a good price, but what they actually want is the best value. And the cheapest option doesn't always deliver the best value. And they're as passionate about the best value as about getting the cheapest price.
Okay, so you brought another word into the discussion, which is an important word, and that's value. Value and price aren't the same thing. But how do we know what is value to the person we're negotiating with, Jonathan? How can we find that out?
Oh, what a great question, Steve, and probably a podcast in its own right. I always start with this question when I engage with somebody, and again, this is the mindset I would propose it would be good to adopt. We have a lot to think about, of course, as we start to qualify. But one of the things I'm always asking is what makes up the value in the eyes of this customer, and specifically this stakeholder that I may be in front of. Pru's point about taking multiple perspectives is just fundamental to success here. I always say, look down your opportunity list, and whatever you're selling. And if if it's not a simple sale and you've engaged with just one person and you have one stakeholder that you're working with, you're probably missing something. It doesn't mean you won't get the deal, but you might not be able to optimize the deal because you might not be able to sell your full value. So I think really thinking about what that value looks like. And Pru is so right with people in a purchasing role. I think you just have to listen to Jatine previous podcast to really understand that. He talked about several elements of that. He was really good in helping us understand that it's about assurance of supply, it's about quality issues, regulatory issues, sustainability, really big thing there. Our services as an organisation, service, whether that be service as we think in servicing instruments, potentially the way that we administer purchases. It could be through support, it could be through training. All of these things are really important to most purchasers I've met. And price again will come into it. But actually, I think I've spent more time talking about the cost of ownership as opposed to just the price. So something may be a little bit more expensive when they buy it, but actually over a 5-year period or 7 or 10-year period, it actually could end up costing them a lot less because it uses, it consumes less gas or liquid or whatever, or power, whatever it happens to be. So, so value for me, it's so subjective. And only by talking to the people involved, in the sale at the customer's end, or their purchase, I should say, will you really understand what that looks like. But you have to know that to go into the negotiation with, because again, it's going to help you make some great trades and trades that actually, they're interested in, right? The ones that are relevant to them.
I think some really good points. First of all, thanks for plugging in the podcast with Jadine. That was the last one we did. So if you haven't heard that one, guys, it's the last episode before this one. And I think also things like guaranteed supply. So, if you're a purchaser of at a car factory and you negotiate a supplier for the tyres and, it's a good deal in the face of it, but if they can't deliver, you're going to close the factory down or stop the factory making cars and you're not going to be very popular, clearly. So it's not just about the price. And also that total cost of ownership model. I did some work a long time ago now with a company in training that made freezers. I won't name who they are, but they had a problem that they were a lot more expensive in terms of purchase price as a -70 freezer than their competitors. So on the face of it, they got a problem. But compared to their competitors, their running costs were a lot less because they used a far more efficient design. So there was a total cost of ownership calculation that they do that says within 18 months you're breaking even and within 2 years you're saving money. So, it's not just about that final price. So let me just take a slight change of direction. So I've got an appointment now, Pru. Imagine that I'm your hapless salesperson, you're my boss, and I've got an appointment to see the purchaser to negotiate a deal, and you're my boss. Do I take you along?
Probably not.
Okay. Why?
Well, this is your account. You've been close to the whole discussions and you have that closeness to what's happened. And I think we also want to have a negotiation, as Jonathan said much earlier in this discussion, where there's a win on both sides. We will both happily go through this again. So It's your account. You own the relationship. You know it best.
Yeah.
So if you bring me along as your boss, there's a whole risk of undermining your credibility, your status, your value, in all honesty, to this organisation. Now, if you are going for this and you want to make sure that you do well, I am very happy as your boss to give you time to run through scenarios, maybe to role play some things and invest the time in you before you go, so that you feel really confident and that we've looked at various things that could happen and maybe talk them through or role play them through to put you in the very best position when you're there, so that everybody walks away with a great deal. That's where I think your manager helps you, not to push you aside and go, look, let me do this.
I'm the super closer. Let me take over. Yeah. I'd love to have you as a boss, Pru. You'd be great. Is there any other time, any other scenario there where we might want to take our boss, despite what Pru said, Jonathan?
So I was definitely going to take the opposite view, but with good, but I think well reasoned, and I don't disagree with anything Pru has said.
No, let's hear it.
So if you think of a strategically, a sale that is absolutely business critical, I think it's okay as the manager to go with the salesperson, but I think there's some prep that you two need to do together before you go.
Yeah.
And clarifying levels of authority and what your roles will be is absolutely crucial in that. I often, I wouldn't say it was a discovery, but the thing I noticed most was that for deals of that nature, where I just felt that I was actually going more, I think, for moral support, but also critically to even up the numbers on each side. So for those larger deals, a salesperson can sit down. There may be 3 or 4 people on the other side of the table. If it's really important to the organization that's buying from you, they may have that many people there. And I think having another pair of eyes is just, it's just so important, because you can observe all the body language, you can make note, you can spot gaps. And hey, we're jumping into part 2, you can call for a timeout. And those timeouts can allow us to to reflect and share two views of what is the same situation for sure. So I think there is a time when it's okay for the manager to go. And if you've got a relatively inexperienced salesperson, I think I'd always be there. But again, I think agreeing levels of authority, being really clear with the customer roles and responsibilities in that meeting is important. So I think there is a case, but also, I think Pru's made a very valid point too. Look, I wouldn't say look at it on a case-by-case scenario, because, of course, we don't always negotiate, do we, in this day and age? We don't always get to have that final conversation. But look at it on a case-by-case would be my thought.
Yeah, good point. And that bit about evening up the numbers is so important. Yeah. Somebody told me on a training course last year that they were asked to negotiate. It was on Teams, and it was just her. And when she switched the camera on and joined Teams, there were 10 of them on the other side, right? Which is like really pressurised, intimidating kind of situation. Yeah. So I'm not saying we turn up with 10 people as well, but it's good to know who's on the team beforehand.
Yeah.
Well, we're starting to go into... Go on, now to you, Jonathan.
No, I was just going to say, as part of the preparation, and we, as you say, it's a perfect link into part 2, isn't it? I think understanding who will be at any meeting we have should be something we do too.
So before we get into part 2, because we need to wrap this one up, one last thing from both of you in terms of the pre-negotiation things to think about. Is there anything that we've missed, Pru?
It's the culmination of all your hard work. So go in it with an intention to enjoy it. Most of the times that we get to the negotiation, we've won the deal in terms of product, technical spec. We wouldn't have got to this stage if we hadn't passed everything and won the deal. Now it's the final best bit. So don't go in dreading it. Go in knowing that this is the culmination of all the good stuff you've done already, and you're going to be good again. It's great. Great
point. Purchasers won't change the technical decision at this stage. It's just the final deal, isn't it? Yeah, really good point. And one from you, Jonathan?
I'm not going to give an additional one. I'm just going to strengthen a point that was made earlier. I think the one I would have given is probably more relevant to part 2. But I would say it's really important that you understand the strength of your position. And that you achieve through great qualification of the customer. Know your strength of your position relative to that of the customer. I think it's a really important thing to understand. Purchasers I've met some amazing purchasers in my life who've just deployed some great tactics against me, and some of those tactics can easily weaken your resolve and weaken your position.
Yeah,
and
completely.
So just having that place to go back to where rationally you've been able to think it through, and you just, with the facts and the information you've got in front of you from all of those previous meetings, discussions, as you've gone through qualification and actually almost certainly through presentation, to be able to go back to that, I think is a really important thing. Remember the strength of your position. It's
absolutely.
Well, again, I'm in danger of getting into part 2, but it's like playing poker, isn't it? And holding a pair of 6s, maybe you can bluff. And the other person's got 3 aces. Okay, interesting.
Well, I've never played poker, so I can't comment on that. But
I haven't either, of course, Steve. No.
And not that we're encouraging our listeners to partake in gambling, of course. So we will be back in a month's time with a part 2 to this. So in that show, we'll be getting much more into the doing part of the negotiation. What happens on the day, and how do we end up with it? And it is so important to say, how do we end up with that win-win at the end of it all, really? So I'm going to be back in 2 weeks' time with a gentleman called Manel Berger, who's a sales manager in our industry. And what we're going to look at, and we've looked at it before, we're going to go back to it again, is looking at the whole world of social selling and how we can generate opportunities through being proactive on mostly LinkedIn. Until then, if you've enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, because that means you'll get the show in your podcast app without having to search for it. So don't forget to subscribe for us. And if you have enjoyed it also, don't forget to give us a review, particularly on Apple. It helps us in lots of mysterious ways. We'll be back again as a team in a month's time. I'll be back again in 2 weeks' time. But until then, happy selling out there, and we'll talk to you soon.